think that over the last 6 months, we've had a good start. But that's all it is, a start. There's much more hard work ahead of us than behind us, and we're excited to do it.
Well, that was the Prime Minister yesterday talking about his 6-month-old government and its efforts to fulfill the promise of change. Individual promises are one thing. The overall pledge to change the way politics is done in Canada is something else. How is that working? Andrew is here in Toronto, Chantal is in Montreal, and Shachi Curl, Executive Director of the Angus Reid Institute, is in Vancouver. So, how's it working, Andrew?
Well, they're certainly working for them in terms of where they're at in the polls. They're continuing to maintain a strong lead in the polls. The Prime Minister's personal approval ratings are very high. And indeed, in the outward appearance of things, it's a much more agreeable face of politics, more gracious at times, more capable of reaching out to opponents, less hardball, less secretive, etc. But behind the Prime Minister's face, and of course his face is everywhere, on every magazine cover and every TV show, behind all that, there's a government that's quite adept at the black arts of politics. It's quite capable, if it wants to, of misrepresenting facts or of fudging the figures, as in the budget, etc. So it's a mixture. It's lighter in tone, but perhaps in substance not hugely different.
Chantal?
Yeah, a change in tone doesn't equal a change in approach. And in this case, I think we are witnessing a return to what used to be more normal a decade ago rather than a revolution. People have forgotten that the way the last parliament became toxic was not the normal way that Parliament worked in days gone by. So at this point, it is a return to a saner, healthier, more respectful approach to Parliament, but it is a return. It is not a new invention. If you're going to change the approach, you have to work on structures and do heavy lifting that will stay once things get bad for the government.
Shachi, those are the columnist views. You kind of gauge public opinion at the Angus Reid Institute. What is the Canadian mood out there about whether or not politics has changed or is changing in the way it's done?
Well, this is for Trudeau and these Liberals just about meeting voter expectations. They don't even have to keep any promises 6 months in. And so the early answer on a change is yes. And it's not just about approval numbers. Of course, that's what gets widely reported. But there's also just sort of sentiment and feeling and how content Canadians are feeling in their lives as Canadians. And what we see are larger majorities saying that they feel like they live in a progressive society, in a caring society. And that's a notable change over the last term and the last administration under the Conservatives. And so while communications isn't policy, it's not necessarily promises kept, it's also not nothing.
If we break it down and sort of go beyond individual policies, where are we seeing change in the way things are done? Chantal?
Lifting restrictions on access to information, possibly a more collegial relationship with the opposition members of the House of Commons. For sure, in the tone of the Prime Minister yesterday, it wasn't very triumphalist, this address to the caucus about the 6 months in, and that there were reminders in there that there was still work to be done on transparency. I think that's obvious. But there are big tests coming, and one of those is the way the government handles criticism and the opposition parties in the discussion on electoral reform. If this Prime Minister is serious about changing the way he does politics, he's going to have to put forward a mechanism that allows the opposition parties to have more say than their numbers in the House of Commons on how we vote in the future.
Andrew?
I think Chantal mentioned that this is in some ways a return to previous governments, and I agree with that. And I think I would say on top of that is this is government that's less sunny ways, less naive or optimistic in that sense than it is better at politics than the previous government. The Harper people mistook cynicism, I think, for competence. And part of that competence in the skills of politics that this government has is a certain calculated ambiguity, in particular on two issues, on the Senate and on pipelines. And in both those cases, you could either look at this as, oh, they're doing things differently, they're much more open to change, much more open to criticism. In the Senate case, maybe this is going to be a different type of Senate, less partisan, or maybe it's just another way of enforcing Liberal control in a way that isn't so obvious. And in the pipelines matter, they're either much more attuned to environmental concerns, much more attuned to Aboriginal concerns, and they really actually are using that to mask their hostility to pipelines, or they want to get the pipelines built, and they understand that the only way you're going to do that is if you co-opt the opposition.
It's interesting that the pipeline example, because sometimes you get the sense that what they're doing is they're giving people time, to express their opinion, knowing all along that in fact they know where they're going on this, but they want to leave the appearance that everybody's had their opportunity to talk and think about it. Shachi?
Well, that's very true. And if you look at what they've done around consultation, and every day it seems like there's a new consultation being opened up or a new review. We heard about Canada Post today. It's clever on this part of government and effective, because what they're doing on one hand is buying time. But the other thing about consultation with public is that there is a play, if it's done well, to actually bring people who may ultimately disagree with the decision that's taken on side through the sense of, well, at least I got asked for my opinion, at least I had a say. And that can be very effective, and it certainly signals a change from the much more centralist, top-down driven, one-man show kind of decision-making that the Harper government was, of course, famous for its perception around.
Chantal?
Yes, except that is all nice, and you can buy time for a while, but at some point, you've got to fish or cut bait. There will be decisions that will be taken that will not have everyone on side, or most people on side. And I don't think that in serious debates on pipelines, for instance, that a lot of those who are opposed are going to be happy just to say that someone listened to them and was nice to them. So I can see a strategy in the pipeline issue, but it seems to be more sophisticated than just listening to people. It seems to me that this government, for instance, understands that it has to get a pipeline in BC to get it through Quebec, through Energy East. Those are strategic moves. They involve a lot of heavy lifting, not just listening.
This is a government that is quite rightly building up a lot of political capital right now, and the test of it in the long run will be whether it uses that political capital. If you look at the previous Harper government, they never really built up a whole lot of political capital, and they were very loath to spend it. So there's, I think, a very distinct difference between the two.
I want to show something that happened today. It kind of touches in some ways on what Chantal was saying earlier about the mood in the House at times between the different parties and the different leaders. It was around the Fort McMurray situation, where everybody in the country is kind of thinking on the same way on this in terms of wanting to help in some fashion and being incredibly emotional about what they're seeing, not surprisingly. But this happened today. The different leaders spoke, and at one point, Rona Ambrose, the interim leader of the Conservative Party, spoke. And she was very emotional. And watch what happens when she does speak. Here it is.
But, Mr. Speaker, Fort McMurray is a place where Canadians have come from all across this country. It's a tough day for Albertans, but we will persevere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And that's how it ended, with a hug from Justin Trudeau to Rona Ambrose. Now, I don't expect, a hug is going to change everything in one moment. We have witnessed these kind of moments before in the House of Commons. But how important are they in terms of not just what happens in there, but the way the public perceives what happens in there? Shachi?
They can be very meaningful and very important, and I know that cynics will take a moment and maybe take a pause and shake their heads at that, but the fact is that in situations like this, whether or not it's a politically calculated move or a very human move of leaders simply being people in that moment and suspending politics, we can actually see approval ratings for politicians go up immediately after times of crisis, because you see politicians, again, either because they know this and they put themselves in these situations and they know the grace notes and the style points to earn, or because they're simply just being themselves in that moment. They're making a connection with people, with Canadians, and we all get a chance to sit back and say, well, I guess that person's human after all, and just not a walking, talking point.
Chantal?
But it is also a dangerous time for politicians. You do remember Jean Chrétien limply throwing a bag of sand at the time of the Manitoba floods. He really was seen to be having a photo opportunity to show that he cares. So there is a delicate balance. I think the public would punish any politician that looked like he was or she was politicizing something like what's happening in Fort McMurray. And I believe that it doesn't cross the mind of most MPs this week to be doing it. So I take it at face value what we see. I think it reflects one of the realities of the House of Commons. It is not just an adversarial place.
Yeah, you know, it is an awkward decision sometimes to make about whether or not to go to these events in the midst of when they're happening, and not just for politicians. The same thing happens to, you know, television newscasts. When the anchor goes to the spot, you know, we all have to make a decision about are we getting in the way? Is this really, you know, taking advantage of a situation or not? Andrew, you close us out on this thought.
Well, I just will focus on those two words, to look like you're politicizing, as Chantal said. Be clear on this, the politics never goes away. People who are in public life all their lives or all their careers or every waking moment have to be concerned about this, and there is, as Chantal said, a great risk of putting a foot wrong. But part of politics is the art of being politic, and at its best that means putting the right foot forward, making the right gesture, saying the right thing, doing the decent thing. And even if part of that is calculation, and some part of it, as Sachi says, is actual personal decency, and some part of it is performance. But overall, they're going to be judged by how they perform under these circumstances, and they know it. They're never going to be unconscious of that.
All right, we'll leave it at that this week. Sachi, great to have you with us.
Thanks.
Andrew and Chantal, as always.